The first question I want to ask you is, the two of the dramatic incidents in the book, and you begin with one of them. You're operating on a young child, if I remember right, in his brain, and the resident who is assisting you is holding a vein that needs to be clamped shut, otherwise it'll bleed and this boy's life is threatened. And the resident loses his grip. Something happens. His attention goes somewhere else for a moment. And all of a sudden, blood fills the cavity or the space in which you're operating. And there's this loose vein now somewhere deep in this lacuna, bleeding. And this child is really, literally exsanguinating on the operating table. And the anesthesiologist has to perform CPR on him under the table.
So the child is 4 years old, and the child is prone because the tumor's back here, and the head is open. And this unfortunate resident made an error, and he ripped this vein, and the child is exsanguinating. This is a very large vein that drains a lot of the venous blood supply. So there's blood flowing out of this child's head. And we can't get control of it.
And where I want to pick this up is, he's got this tremendous technical skill, but it's not his technical skill that he relies on at that moment. He actually drops into, Jim does, not a desperate technical search for the vein. And I want you to describe what happened to you internally, but a deep state of mindfulness and the intentionality, actually. Mindfulness and intentionality is how I interpret that experience. So just tell us what you did and what you experienced and what happened for you at that moment.
Well, I think for almost anyone in this room, if you're in that situation, what would be the natural thing? You would be terrified, right? Because you're seeing this child who's literally, he had a cardiac arrest. And the natural tendency is to go there because, frankly, you're terrified. And you don't want to be the person who kills this child. But at that moment, as that blood is oozing out, I reflected back on these lessons that this woman had taught me, which was to go and be absolutely present. I had to stop everything except for being there. And when I was in that space, I could see where that vein was. And it allowed me to calmly take a clip, reach into this field filled with blood, and place the clip there. And suddenly, the heart has stopped beating, and they're pumping on his chest. When that happens, suddenly the heart starts again. The bleeding stops, and then the child comes back. At the start of that story, which actually introduces the book, this child and his mother is looking to me, and I'm reassuring them and telling them everything's going to be okay, and that's what I believe. And fortunately, it ended up being okay. And at the end of that story, this poor child, I'm terrified because we've had a period where the child's had no blood supply to his brain. Now, fortunately, children are much more tolerant than we are. And, I took care of the issue, closed the wound, put a head dressing on, and I was very concerned this child would not wake up normally. And in fact, I had told the mother this, but the child opened his eyes and was breathing on his own and talked immediately and was perfectly fine. So.
also you seem moved when you talk about that experience. And I tell you, I feel moved being in your presence when you talk about it. So it's still very alive for you, isn't it?
Yes, of course. Yeah. You know, the thing is, so many of us, we make big effort not to show this.
Yeah. Yeah.
Because why? Because you think people are going to judge you, and you don't want to look weak. And you know, it's funny because I give a lot of talks, and I had a psychiatrist come up to me one time, and she said, "Jesus, I noticed as you're talking, you had tears, your voice broke." She goes, "You know, if you spend 3 sessions with me, I can get rid of that." Yet this is what we want to be. Because you see, as soon as I can show my vulnerability, it allows you to show yours, and we connect. And you cannot connect without being vulnerable. You cannot truly connect. And that's when you truly see the other person, and you let down those barriers and you become vulnerable. And that's where you start really having meaning in relationships.
Thank you. And a number of people in this workshop have already apologized for being vulnerable. What you said about the psychiatrist, I have this standard question. What do you call somebody who wants to fix in somebody else something they haven't resolved in themselves?
A psychiatrist.
Called psychiatrist, yeah.
No.
Yeah.
How many physicians are in this room?
Yeah.
So the people who you looked up at in class and said, "Boy, they're really messed up," they're almost invariably the ones who go into psychiatry. Now, of course, there are exceptions, okay? Because I know there are 3 or 4 psychiatrists, and they're going to go, "Jim Doty's such an asshole. He said this horrible thing." I'd be facetious. But
I would like to come back to talk to you about the medical ideology and the medical education that we both received. But to come back to your story again, so there was another incident later on in the book where now you're operating on an adult woman who's a singer, and you particularly love her music, and again it's a dire crisis situation in the middle of the operation, and quite uncharacteristically for you, you start shaking, which is not what you want in a neurosurgeon necessarily. And again, there's 2 things about that. Again, you drop into yourself, and that's how you find it's not through your technical skills. You're very confident in your technical skills, but that's not what got you through again, was it? It was your capacity to somehow go deep inside.
No, in this instance, this was a woman who had a aneurysm sitting in her speech area, and it had not ruptured actually at that time. But over the period of time of meeting with her and talking to her, I became friends with her, and I'd recommend she see other people, etc., to get other opinions. And she came back and said, "I want you to do this operation." And
in fact, you're the only one that she felt safe enough to do it. Yeah.
And the thing was, she'd given me her CDs. I'd listened to them, so I'd become emotionally connected to this woman. And you cannot. When you're a neurosurgeon or a surgeon, you have to become a technician. You no longer have any connection to their humanity. And in this particular instance, as I opened her skull up and exposed this aneurysm, literally it was about to rupture. The wall was so thin you could see the blood swirling there. And this is near her speech area, which would be where her voice and it comes from. And so as I was about to put the clip on after I had dissected it out to separate it from the circulation, I thought of her as a human being. And I became very emotional, and my hands started shaking, which that's not a good thing. So I went back into this space and recentered myself And in this case, not to be more vulnerable, but to be less. To go back into this place where I'm a complete technician and not connected to her humanity. And one of the challenges with doctors is because sometimes this hurts so much that they permanently separate themselves and they can't get there to hold you, to be with you, and you feel they're distant. And I'm not sure if, I think it's good, but I can go back and forth between these situations, and I can hold somebody and cry with them. And many times, I tell our residents that my successes as a physician, and even as a neurosurgeon, with all the technology we have, it is just as important to have your heart there and to connect as it is every aspect of the technical parts of this. It's that important for you to be there, because a lot of times what people are ailing from is not a physical illness, but it is an illness of the heart. Is it an illness of their disconnection from themselves? It is an illness of the pain they have suffered. And if you can't see that, because that's what needs to be healed, oftentimes it's not the physical part.